everyone. This is your host, Kate Stevens. Welcome back to another episode of the Omnichannel Marketer. I'm excited to have Alli Ball as a guest for us today from Food Biz Wiz. Alli, it's so nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me, Kate. I'm glad to be here.
So Alli, tell us a little bit about your personal background.
Yeah, so I got started in the food industry back in, 2008 here in San Francisco, where I still live, in the role of assistant grocery buyer at Buy Rate Market. And in that role, I had the pleasure of working with all of these small up-and-coming brands. Back in the day, Buy Rate was really well known for being a leader in specialty food, which meant that I often was sourcing brands directly. And oftentimes we were the first wholesale account for those brands. So that's really where I got my chops in the food industry and understood what was the role of the wholesale buyer? What did that look like? You know, I spent a long time at Buy Rate. I moved on to Buy Rate Divisadero, opening that second location for them. And I left there about 10 years ago and started my own consulting business. And for the first few years, I worked with other retailers all across the US, helping with developing grocery departments, training grocery buyers, doing inventory management, category reviews, merchandising, all of that stuff that is grocery related. And really got to see like what the heck was going on in grocery around the US. So that's my background, retail, and then slowly transitioning over to the producer side of things. Those vendors, those brands who are working so hard to get their products on retail shelves. Yeah, so that's the quick version of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the production side, working with brands, getting into retail. Is that part of Food Biz Wiz? Like, how do those things all fit together?
Yeah. So one of the things that was really frustrating to me in my role at Buy Rate was that I would see these really passionate producers, these better for you brands, these values aligned brands, these brands who were trying really hard to succeed in the world of wholesale, but they just didn't know what the heck they were doing. Their passion got them so far, and then their eyes were, they were just blindsided once they got into this bigger world of grocery. I realized, through my years at Buy Rate that if I wanted to have a bigger impact on our industry, I had to do it outside of the walls of Buy Rate. One wholesale account, even if it's a really good one, is not going to make or break a brand's success. And so when I left Buy Rate, I had this theory that if I could share the behind the scenes of wholesale with emerging brands, I could have a big impact on the food industry. In those first few years when I was doing that retail consulting, I was also doing wholesale consulting on the side with emerging brands, helping them understand how to speak the language of wholesale, what that wholesale buyer wanted to hear, how to craft a sales pitch, how to put sales systems in place, how to sell through once you're actually on the shelf. And Kate, as I was developing this consulting framework, I had a wait list of brands that wanted to work with me. I was a sole founder. I was working, 60 hours a week. I was like back, working just as much as I was at Buy Rate. And I was like, how the heck am I going to scale this business? How am I going to have this bigger impact? And it dawned on me that, 90% of my brand clients got stuck at the same places in their growth. And they wanted to work with consultants, but emerging brands just didn't have much of a budget. And so I was like, okay, I've got this system here. I've got this framework here that I'm taking my consulting clients through. What would happen if I created this framework and created a curriculum around it and designed a group program here? This was back in 2015, like way before we all went online in 2020. And I launched the first version of Retail Ready, our now signature program, in 2016. We have had over 3,000 founders go through that program at this point, and it's the only way that I work with brands. So that's now how, at Food Biz Wiz, how we work in the food industry. We help emerging brands develop sales systems, helping them understand how to land on those wholesale shelves and how to increase sales, both in their new accounts that they're getting through Food Biz Wiz, through Retail Ready, and in those existing accounts that, they've already worked so hard to get. So yeah, we do that all through Retail Ready at this point.
Amazing. Okay. So, for a brand considering retail ready, what does that look like? What does that state of a brand typically look like?
Yeah. And, let me talk about it even just like outside of our program, right? Because I want to be careful here that I don't want this just to turn into a pitch for retail ready as much as I love our program. When I think about brands moving into wholesale, there are important considerations. One, do you have a product that people will buy at the price that you need to charge in order to stay in business, right? So what is that market fit? And what price do you need to charge to have a real business about this? So market fit. Then inside of Retail Ready, we call it our right people, right channel philosophy. So who are you selling to and what channels are the most profitable for your brand? It's really tied to that first step. Once you've got that market fit, where the heck are we selling? And Kate, it is interesting. Some brands come into Retail Ready and we take them through this framework and then they're like, oh, shoot, wholesale is not for me. Like I should just go direct to consumer. I should focus on Amazon. I should focus, food service, hospitality channels. And that's great. Like, I don't care if people choose wholesale or not, right? The key is figuring out what channel is right for you. And then that third piece, Kate, I would say is figuring out your operations. Like, how the heck am I going to produce my product consistently to meet the demand of whatever channels I'm selling it in, right? And how am I going to get my product to that end consumer, whether it is the wholesale channel, the person who's consuming your product or using your product. How am I operationally sound enough to deliver upon the promises that I'm making as I'm selling my product line? So market fit, operations, I touched on financials in there. But yeah, it all comes back to what the heck am I producing and can I make a real business out of it?
Let's dig into each of those a bit further. So on the, market fit and the pricing,
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of brands come on and talk about how they will initially start D2C because it is a way for them to get that quick feedback, and understand some element of the market for their product. How do you translate D2C learnings to wholesale? And, what if a brand hasn't done kind of that D2C channel first? What are other ways that brands are evaluating whether or not they have that early fit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when I think about D2C, it's either online or it's in person, right? Like a farmer's market is still considered D2C. So oftentimes we have early stage brands who are trying to launch into wholesale and they've done their D2C research in farmers markets or pop-up events, smaller scale wholesale accounts, things like that before they're really going all in with it. So for your listeners, Kate, who are like, well, I've got a bit, I have been selling my product, but I'm not selling it online. We can still use that learning regardless of where you're selling to your consumer. So I think a lot of it is, what questions are they asking when I'm presenting my product to them? What hesitations do they have around buying this? How are they responding to the price point? How are they responding to my flavor assortment? What are they saying to me? And how am I using that language to translate to the retail experience? Maybe that's through your packaging, that, maybe you've got different packaging for your wholesale than your direct to consumer. Maybe it is your shelf talkers that you've got or your freezer clings that people are seeing when they're walking the aisles. Maybe it's how you're speaking about your product to the store staff so they understand what language to use as they speak to the consumers. So I think when brands start direct to consumer, there is so much marketing material that they can get in really having those conversations with folks on how folks are responding to the product line. One other thing that I love it when folks start direct to consumer, especially, directly from their own website, when they use post-purchase surveys. And we've got a whole module on this in Retail Ready where once someone checks out and has literally, opened their wallet and paid for your product line, what strategic questions can you ask them that will get us set up for wholesale success? Again, we can ask them about price point. We can ask them about usage. What the heck are they doing with your product line? We can even ask them things like, if we were to sell in retail, which retailers do you want us to sell in? where do you want to find our products? Things like that. So really you're right, Kate, using that direct to consumer face-to-face experience, whether that's online face-to-face or in person, to shape some of your decisions when you land on the retail shelf is really important. And then, Kate, the second part of your question was, what if brands aren't doing D2C at the beginning and they're going straight to retail, right? I would say, I don't know, probably 60% or so of our brands inside of Retail Ready never touch direct to consumer before they go into retail. And my advice there is to always start in your own backyard and go really, really deep regionally, usually in independents, smaller chains, stores that feel a bit more manageable rather than jumping straight to the Kroger's and Whole Foods of the world where the pressure's on. It's much harder as you jump to that tier of retail. So for those folks who have done no direct-to-consumer, retail is their first thing that they're getting into, always recommend deep in your own region before expanding.
And you talked about right people, right channel. What is kind of the landscape of channels that are even in the consideration set?
Yeah, okay. So obviously, direct-to-consumer is the channel. I consider Amazon and, all those other e-commerce sites a little bit separate from direct-to-consumer. I wonder if you agree, Kate, right?
It's definitely
yeah, okay, great. Separate. Yeah, separate here, right? It's when I say D2C, it's literally like on your own website or, again, if you're doing something like a farmer's market at your own booth, there's our Amazon channels and things like that. And then when I say wholesale, so Kate, our program's called Retail Ready. Should have named it Wholesale Ready, but that just doesn't have the same ring to it. So when I think about wholesale, we are really looking at channels like traditional brick-and-mortar retail, like in-person retail. That's like your grocery stores, your specialty shops, gift shops, things like that. We also cover food service. So if you are talking to someone who needs to make a decision on your product for their menu or mini bar or cafeteria or whatever that is, that's food service. We also, again, do a bit of hospitality. Again, that's still wholesale, but things like airlines, spas, anything like that where it is tied into that consumer experience in a hospitality setting. Let's see, did I get them all? Oh, and then finally, the other one that we cover is e-commerce wholesale. So the things like Thrive Market of the world. Here in the Bay Area, we've got Good Eggs. That's one of my favorites. Places where it's still a traditional grocery experience. You're still building one single cart with many, many brands, and you're still talking to a real buyer on the other end, a real grocery buyer who has to make product assortment decisions just for their digital shelves. So when I think about channels, it's all of those different things. Direct to consumer, the e-com channels or wholesale. Did I miss any of them, Kate? What else do we have here? I think that's it.
That was pretty comprehensive. And I know the third element is ops, but I think that's an entire another beast. So let's like kind of just table that one for another time.
Yeah.
But what about getting into retail is so difficult?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, where should I begin? I think one of the biggest challenges is that wholesale buyers are so busy, so incredibly busy, and they have so many roles that they're playing in the day-to-day that it is just hard to get face time with those wholesale buyers. And so often I hear brands who feel like the wholesale buyer is just the gatekeeper to their success. That if only they could get to, 5 minutes with that wholesale buyer, everything would be great and they would be on their way to national success. And brands get frustrated because they feel like, isn't it the buyer's job to meet with brands? Like, what else are they doing all day long? And one of the hardest things to do is to actually get a hold of those buyers. And, this is where folks often ask me, okay, Alli, like, what's the secret, right? Like, what's the shortcut here? And this is the sad news that there isn't a shortcut, right? It's old fashioned, picking up the phone, online sleuthing, knocking on doors. It's old school sales. figuring out who those category managers are and how to get in front of them. So I think one of the biggest challenges of retail is simply getting in front of the right buyers. It takes a long time. And if anyone's trying to sell you a shortcut, it just, it's too good to be true. I'll say that.
So, certainly not a shortcut, but I've definitely seen strategies that have been effective. One of them that I've seen is attending trade shows and presenting at trade shows, which is like a very obvious, avenue in which to meet buyers. Another that I've seen as kind of a strategy is LinkedIn. And so just like utilizing LinkedIn to share updates about your brand, to message buyers. Are there other kind of strategies that you've seen be effective for getting in front of those buyers?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned trade shows. And once brands have the budget, one of my favorite things to do is to attend distributor trade shows or curated trade shows like the ECRM trade shows, where they are specifically pairing brands and buyers based on categories. So it's almost more like speed dating than just being at Expo West. I love Expo West, but you go there and you're in a sea of 80,000 people hoping that Whole Foods buyer walks past your booth, hoping that you get their attention, that they stop and they try your product. Hoping isn't a great strategy, although sometimes you can have right time, right place. But one of the things that I love, like I said, is finding these programs, whether it's a UNFI tabletop show or a KHE show, or even smaller distributors do this, or the ECRM sessions, where there's more of a curated matchmaking so that you aren't just hoping that you run into the right people at the trade show. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So love LinkedIn for buyer outreach. Absolutely. We have brands inside of Retail Ready who are actually having success on Instagram for buyer outreach as well. And it feels a little untraditional, right? Like LinkedIn is where we do business. Instagram is where we play. It might be because there's less competition on Instagram, but we've seen Retail Ready students get a little cheeky with it, where they will poll their Instagram audience and say, where should we sell our granola bars? And of course, their followers will tag or say a few stores and stuff. And so then that founder tags that brand and they're like, hey, Jimbo's, 3 people said we should sell our granola bars here. Any chance we can set up a meeting? Literally just putting that in their stories and their posts, things like that. And sure enough, we've seen some really great connections made on that platform too.
Makes sense. It's just being creative and getting in front of them.
Totally.
Okay, so getting attention of the buyer.
Yep.
What else about the broader kind of distributor retail model is difficult about wholesale?
Yeah, I mean, man, I can get on a soapbox about this, Kate. One of the things that I'm so frustrated about is that the typical advice on how to grow your brand in wholesale is to find a co-packer who will make your product as cheaply as possible, right? So you can then in turn keep as much margin as you can. Go out and find a broker who will sell your products into stores for you. So you don't have to do the sales, but a broker is going to do it for you. And then find a distributor who is going to take your product from point A to point B. And the challenge with this advice is that it just doesn't work for the majority of brands. For so many brands, it's an outdated model, right? Co-packers are extremely hard to find and extremely hard to control the quality of your brand. Not always. I mean, there are great co-packers out there too, where there are always exceptions to these rules, but co-packing can be really challenging. Finding a broker who cares about your brand as much as you do, who can sell your brand, sell your product line into retailers, with the same finesse that you can. That's really hard to find. And then on the distribution piece, it is so easy to lose money on distribution. Kate, breaks my heart to have retail ready students, come into our program and they say, I got a $25,000 chargeback from my distributor because this retailer went out of business and our product's now sitting in that distributor's warehouse, waiting for that retailer who went out of business. And now we're getting billed back for that product, right? And so there are all these ways that system, co-packer to broker to distributor, isn't setting up early stage brands for success. It requires so much capital to be able to succeed in that environment. It's just really cash intensive. And I just have to think that at some point this model is going to break. We're already seeing cracks in it. We're not there yet where it's dissolved. Truthfully, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I get really frustrated when these young brands blindly follow that advice because they think there isn't any other way. Yeah.
Explain chargebacks to our listeners.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to explain it. I'll give you like one sentence on it because there's a whole can of worms that we could open up here. But a chargeback in the most simple terms is when a distributor, usually a distributor, invoices you, the brand, for something related to your own product. So you could get a chargeback for anything from short shelf life product. Maybe your product still has 6 months before it expires, but in the eyes of that distributor, it's now short dated and you get a chargeback for it, even though they can still sell it for another 6 months. Maybe you're getting a chargeback because you didn't deliver your product, your few pallets, during the 45-minute time window that you were supposed to show up at the loading dock. And so you're getting charged back for it. Maybe you're getting chargebacks because your product didn't show up in perfect quality. And, maybe some of your bags were opening. And in that case, you probably should be charged back for them. But there are so many reasons why that distributor can charge you to chargebacks. It could be that you're on promo at one of your retailers and the distributor negotiated the promotion without your knowing as the brand, and then they're charging you back for that sale price, right? So this is why it's so important, Kate, to have someone review your contracts with your distributors before you just blindly sign them, right? I don't do this, right? There are lawyers who do this in our industry who really make sure that you know what you're getting into as a small brand, and that, well, two things. One, you know what you're getting into. You can decide if it's something you want to say yes to or no to. And either you have that negotiation with the broker, the distributor, or even the co-packer. You say, thanks, but no thanks. This isn't going to work for me. I'm not comfortable doing this. And again, that's where you make an alternative decision. Maybe you're deciding, I'm not going to go with the big distributors. I'm going to start with a regional one who is a bit more empathetic to smaller brands. Or maybe I'm going to self-distribute until I can't anymore. And it might be a little painful, but at least we're going to, save that margin while we can. And then when we have a healthier cash flow, when we are more operationally sound, we will move to distribution. Once we have that core account base, we'll move to distribution, right? So just going into it with eyes wide open is so important here.
What's the inflection point or size of a brand's number of doors that it makes sense to be working with one of these, UNF?
UNFI. That's a really, really good question. This is where it's really challenging in our industry. There's almost a chicken and the egg scenario going on here, where distributors don't want to take you on until you've got, we say 3 dozen accounts inside of Retail Ready. There's some, negotiation here, but a few dozen accounts that distributor wants you to have that core account base before they're going to bring you into distribution. And that makes sense, right? The distributor does not get you into retail accounts. The distributor's sole job is to literally move your product, to distribute your product from warehouse to retailer. And so if brands think that once I get into distribution, that's going to help with the sales, help open doors, help get me in new retailers, that is a short-sighted mistake here. Those distributors want you to already be indoors before they say, yeah, sure, we'll distribute your product for you, because otherwise it's not worth it for them. But then on the other hand here, Kate, retailers often want you to have distribution before they're willing to bring you in, right? Because they want the ease of ordering through a larger distributor like UNFI or KeHE, rather than going direct with you. So it is that chicken and the egg thing. Like, what do? Do you get the retail accounts first, or do you get the distributor accounts first? And typically the way we overcome this is if you don't have those core accounts and you really know, again, maybe you've got a brand, maybe you're a brand with funding, maybe you've got, more cash to play with here, maybe you've got a different set of goals, and you know that big distribution is how you're going to get there fast. What we do is we get chain accounts to, essentially, how do we say it? Like, make a commitment to buy, whether that's, a verbal commitment, ideally written in an email. And we see some sort of commitment that says, if you work with UN, we will place you in, 24 of our stores in this region or something like that. So we can get around it by having that commitment to buy. And that's how we approach distributors.
Okay, we're running out of time here. So kind of one question before we head into our lightning round.
Okay.
What are some of the best tools available to brands to help drive velocity once they do get into retail?
That's a really good one. Let's just talk about free tools at first, right? So I think the biggest, we divide it into two things inside of Retail Ready. We do our coordinated kickoff, and then our reorder checklist, which is the quarterly marketing strategy that you're implementing. So with that coordinated kickoff, it's thinking about, what am I doing in the first 30 days of launching into a retailer that drives trial, that attracts new customers? And so on the free side of things, right, that's connecting with store staff, making sure that they know your story and that they are turned into salespeople for your brand. It's connecting with that store's marketing department, making sure that if they have any sort of communication with their shoppers, that you are in front of their audience. It's doing demos. I mean, not free, but doing demos. It might be doing geo-targeted ads where you're doing couponing in that first 30 days of the launch. Really making sure that you realize that once you land that account, your work is just starting, right? We really need to make sure you are selling off the shelf. So we do that 30 days of concentrated effort through that framework. I mentioned, at the store level, connecting with the shoppers, connecting with the stockers who are literally touching your product. So once we're done with those 30 days, we move into the reorder checklist and our quarterly marketing strategy. And Kate, that's not all that different than your coordinated kickoff, but it's done through the lens of what is coming up this quarter that is seasonally appropriate for my product line, right? Is there anything seasonally related to my product that we can tie a push into? What sort of promotions are we running? Again, is that a coupon? Is it a scan back? Is it we're doing demos and we're doing buy one, get one free. Like, what sort of promotion are we running? How are we getting in front of those shoppers through that store's marketing department? How are we using our social media channels to connect to in-store? And then again, how are we nurturing those wholesale buyers so that they see us as a valuable, trustworthy brand? So that's all the free stuff. And then, of course, there are different programs that you can buy into, merchandising programs, things like We Stock. We love We Stock over here at Food Biz Wiz, social nature campaigns, things like that. But that gets into the, marketing 301 for driving trial on the shelf.
Moving into our lightning round.
Okay.
Favorite omni-channel brand?
I really love De La Calle Tepache. I think they do an incredible job, all of their channels. I mean, their website is absolutely beautiful. I never buy brands direct to consumer, but sure enough, I'm somehow on their subscription. So yeah, Tepache, it's a canned beverage, and they're just doing such an incredible job there.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah.
What do you wish you could change about our industry?
I wish I could change how slow it is. It is like so freaking slow, like fax machines, clipboards, like old school slow. And I mean, the thing that still really bugs me is how challenging it is to access capital, particularly for underrepresented founders. Women-owned businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses, the capital just isn't there for them. And it's really hard to survive in this industry if you don't have cash.
Yeah, that is a serious problem.
Yeah.
Favorite podcast?
Can I say my own? The Food Biz Wiz podcast?
Or what do you like about your own?
I love our podcast. We have a library of 250 episodes that's all about growing your packaged product brand in wholesale channels. But if we're not talking about CPG industry, I love listening to 10% Happier with Dan Harris. It's a beautiful podcast just about how you can simplify and optimize your life, becoming 10% happier. Yeah, it's a good one.
Favorite newsletter?
I really like Link in Bio by Rachel Carden. She's the former lead social from Bon Appetit. So really connected to food industry here. And she just, the way she talks about social media and digital marketing is really brilliant.
Favorite social media channel?
I like Snack Shots.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's
it's
great.
just so funny. It's really funny. It's, she was the one who broke the Foxtrot news. So she's, like really timely. She's just really witty in the land of CPG and really like pokes fun at a lot of like the stupid stuff that we're doing in this industry.
Favorite book?
Yeah, I'll give a business book here. I love Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. That really, I probably read this 10 years ago and it sticks with me. It's about how operating in our zone of genius and getting in that flow in our work and then, delegating all that we can that is outside of our zone of genius really impacts our ability to do our best work. Yeah, Free to Focus. I love that book.
Favorite event that you're planning on going to this year?
Okay, so there's not much left of the year, but I'm going to the Good Food Mercantile in San Francisco in a few weeks. It's mid-September, so depending on when this podcast airs, it might be long past. But the Good Food Foundation is a nonprofit foundation. They've been around, probably 13 years or so. And it was founded by this woman, Sarah Wiener, and they celebrate responsibly made, delicious American brands. They have a blind tasting every year, and they have these 3 mercantiles. They call it like the unfancy food show, where they, it's one day, it's during the daytime, it's in a place with like beautiful natural light. It's, only 1,000 folks or so rather than tens of thousands. And it's a really beautiful trade show for brands who are just dipping their toes into the world of wholesale and specialty food. So I'm planning on attending that, and I'm really excited for it.
Perfect. And Alli, where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so 2 places. You can find me directly on my website, foodbizwiz.com. There's no H in Wiz, so bizwiz.com. Or, I mentioned this, but I hang out on Instagram a lot. That's my favorite platform. So you can find me at Food Biz Wiz on Instagram. If you are listening, drop me a DM. I love following new brands. So tell me you're listening and we'll connect.
Amazing. Alli, thank you so much for your time. It was great hearing your story.
Thanks for having me.
If you liked this podcast, follow me and the Bridge page on LinkedIn and Twitter for hot takes and tactical advice. If you really loved today's episode, we'd love a review on the podcasting platform of your choice, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thanks for listening.